Content, in the context of social media, can be defined as materials such as text, pictures, videos, podcasts, etc., made available to viewers and monetized for profit. Typically, when engaging in online discourse, we primarily use this definition to describe the sum of a person's presence on social media, aka their brand. It could simply be their aesthetic, or even a physical product they're promoting to their audiences. But when we say things like content creator, or refer to someone's content as a topic of discussion, this is generally what we're referring to. Nowadays, it's pretty common to see artists and writers use their platforms to gain traction and garner sales for their artwork or novels by turning it into social media content. They may post time lapses of their drawings, demos of the music they're producing, or excerpts of a chapter they're currently writing. In this way, their art becomes the sum of their content, and therefore an integral part of their social media branding. But what happens when you hype up content you haven't actually made available to the public yet, that no one online has seen or read a portion of, and accumulate such a massive following where the content itself isn't actually your book, but your lifestyle as an author? And what happens when that content does eventually become available, only to fail to live up to expectations? Welcome back to my channel. Today I'd like to discuss the controversy of Audra Winter, a self-published author on TikTok who spent a significant portion of her online career hyping up a book that wasn't even published yet. If you find this topic interesting, be sure to stick around, hit the like button, and subscribe if you haven't already. Audra Winter is a 22-year-old indie author who recently came under fire on BOOKTOK, the subgenre of TikTok that discusses books, authors, and everything bookish, for releasing what appeared to be a drastically underdeveloped piece of media called The Age of Scorpius, a young adult novel set in the fantasy world of Guardian, spelled incorrectly on purpose, a world in which zodiac signs determine one's fate. The creator amassed a lot of attention online for being a self-proclaimed prodigy author who'd been writing novels since she was 12, who was pushed out of traditional publishing and forced to turn to self-publishing as an option. It's nothing new for authors who've become disenchanted by big publishing companies to turn to self-publishing as an alternative. Not only can it be arduous for new writers to navigate the industry, but it can often be very difficult to get recognized by a publishing house in the first place when they're screening thousands of manuscripts on a daily basis, and there's no guarantee yours will be considered. But self-publishing isn't easy either. It requires a lot of out-of-pocket expenses for things like editing, printing, and advertising, even when you use an all-in-one website like Lulu or Kindle Direct that offer branding and marketing tools. From the outside looking in, this seemed to be precisely the situation Audra had found herself in, a young debut author who was relying on social media to generate buzz for her novel. However, most authors that turn to social media as a way to advertise their book already have the finished manuscript ready to be printed and sold to readers. But after thousands of pre-orders, when the book was finally released to the public, it was far from being what audiences expected. Even Audra's most loyal and devout fans were disappointed with the lack of quality in her writing, and the backlash was immediate. Audra quickly became an example of how terribly sideways things can easily go when you set up certain expectations for your audience and fail to follow through on the promises made. But this was only scratching the surface of the dilemma. As it would turn out, the issues with Audra's novel debut ran even deeper than people anticipated. After doing some digging, fans learned that her claim of being an award-winning debut author, while not entirely unfounded, was a bit exaggerated. She did win a minor Wattpad award for a piece of fiction she wrote under a different pseudonym. However, in a surprising twist, it was an earlier version of the story Age of Scorpius. And the 10 years of writing experience she claimed to have was only 10 years of writing and rewriting the same novel. While her TikToks promoting Age of Scorpius as a novel that had been in development for 10 years were technically true, the reality was a far cry from how the author branded herself on social media. Her reasons behind abandoning traditional publishing in favor of self-publishing were also a bit distorted, which people found highly suspicious. She initially claimed to have been let go from a publishing company due to them deciding to no longer publish science fiction or fantasy novels, which was proven to be false. But she later claimed that she made the choice to leave the company to have more creative freedom over her writing. As time went on, the inconsistencies of Audra's claims about herself continued to rack up, and viewers began to speculate whether or not her entire persona on TikTok was embellished, all for the sake of generating pre-sales of her book. Both the initial controversy and Audra's response to the negative feedback she was receiving, in which she seemed entirely unwilling to take any constructive criticism of her novel, convinced audiences that she was far from being the type of author she promoted herself as. From the outside looking in, it seems as though Audra may have had a specific idea in mind of how she wanted to promote herself to her readers, and given the lack of effort put into improving her actual writing over time, she obviously focused more on that public image than the work she was creating. Her image became the content, rather than the novel. And this, I believe, is largely due to creative people no longer seeing themselves as artists, but as content creators. I was recently watching a video on the subject by Jolie Black, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and I commented something along the lines of Audra seeming like she sees her writing more as content than art, because I fully believe this to be the case, and with some encouragement, I decided to make a video about it, because I don't think enough people realize just how much social media has shaped the way we view creative writing. Audra is not the only author that feels like they see their writing more as content than art. And most people don't really know the difference between this type of author versus someone who sees their work as simply art to be made. Even trying to explain the difference, I struggle to put it into words because it's a very specific type of behavior I see online more and more frequently, but I'm not sure there's a word for it yet with writers. I think the best way to explain it is by saying Audra feels like your typical influencer, rather than merely an author promoting her book. Like she's selling you her lifestyle as an indie author rather than just a product or an idea. Because of how commonplace it's become for people to turn to social media to try to go viral and attract attention, naturally more writers would wish to do the same to shed a spotlight on their books. Even traditionally published authors have more of a social media presence to help funnel new readers to their works. It's also quite commonplace to see influencers using their already existing platforms to promote new creative projects they've decided to undertake. But as a consequence, audiences aren't usually buying these products because they're good products, necessarily. Most, if not all, are buying them because they were made by their favorite content creator. And there's a huge difference between building your brand as a writer and as a content creator in general. A good example of this would be Gabby Hanna using her platform to promote her series of poetry books. Gabby was not initially famous for writing, and whether or not her books were objectively good was completely irrelevant. Her most loyal fans were willing to buy these books because they were written by Gabby Hanna. The books were Gabby Hanna content, and they were fans of Gabby Hanna, not her poetry. Unfortunately, this is how a lot of writers that started out as content creators were able to reach bestseller lists despite having bad reviews of the actual quality of content, or even a lack of solid writing skills. More unfortunate is that it's become the norm to judge a book not by the quality, but by the reputation of the author. But with all that being said, this is how I believe Audra has inadvertently positioned herself as a public figure. Not just as a writer looking for alternative outlets to attract attention to her books, but as a content creator hoping that fans will buy her books even if the writing is subpar because they're fans of Audra Winter as a personality. Because they want to support her as an individual, as someone they've developed a unique parasocial relationship with and feel an emotional attachment to. To purchase Age of Scorpius because it was written by an indie author and not published by a multinational corporation, because of the sentiment behind it. To support the world of Guardian not because it was spectacular, but because it was Audra's world. She was more concerned with building the world as a social media brand than as a literary world for readers to immerse themselves in. and this is a trend that I fear a lot of authors are dipping into. Audra's circumstances aren't really that unique if we adjust the scope. There have been many instances when followers have supported a project based solely on the reputation of a creator alone. Influencers that view their creative projects merely as content to be monetized, packaged, and sold. Who love the idea of being a well-known published author more than they actually love the act of writing. Audra may very well feel that intense love for writing, but in her desire to have an individual connection with her audience, apart from the actual contents of her book, that love was very much overshadowed by being a public figure. Now, alternatively to this theory, there is the theory that Audra was more in love with the imaginary world of Guardian in her head than with writing as an outlet. Jolie Black did an incredible job of going into depth about paracosm worlds, and I would highly recommend watching her videos on Audra Winter, which I will link in the description. But to elaborate, along with being more in love with the idea of being an author than actually enjoying writing, there is the theory that Audra doesn't actually enjoy writing as a craft, but rather writing The Age of Scorpius was the only way for her to make this imaginary world she was obsessed with tangible to some degree. To an extent, I can absolutely relate to this. Having my own fantasy worlds that my writing never feels sufficient in breathing to life, that I feel would be much better if they were written by someone else. I can also relate to having a lack of talent in a specific art form I would like to, that keeps me from actualizing a piece of media the way I would love to be able to. Having no talent whatsoever in drawing comics means the fictional worlds I create could never become outstanding graphic novels that even Marvel would be envious of. I think this is probably the reason why Audra was equally obsessed with building a team of collaborators to contribute to the project in various ways, i.e. designing maps and character art. We're not always going to have the tools or even the talent we like to have in order to produce an excellent work of art. A lot of times, collaboration is necessary to give the project the attention to detail it deserves. But you have to have a finished project to promote to your audience. And if you're not confident that your project is the best it could possibly be with you spearheading it, it might be best to practice a little humility and hand it off to someone else more capable before you start advertising it to the public. And if it is a project that requires funding to bring into fruition, there are better alternatives to securing that funding than to build a social media account around being an indie author while misleading your audience. And I think the most important thing to remember as a writer is that not everyone is going to love your work as much as you do, but if they do love your work, make sure it's for the right reasons. That's all for this video. Hope you enjoyed this topic, and definitely make sure to check out Jolie Black and the other sources in my description. Until next time.